at the University of Illinois. She got in trouble once again because she was teaching a course, entry-level course on composition. And the administration was unhappy because none of her students failed. She didn't give out Fs unless they did complete the work. And they said, this is impossible. Not everyone can get a C or better. And she said, it's the way I teach. We give them an assignment on the first day, and they write that assignment. They do that composition. Like say, what did you do for your summer vacation? And then somebody turns in a terrible report. You know, it's bad. It's bad grammar, bad. She says, write it again. And she gives the other people in the class another assignment, but they have to rewrite the same thing. She said sometimes they would write it 4, 5, 6 times, the same thing, by correcting it each time and her helping them. And she said at the end, all of her students ended up handing in papers that were worth a C, because they had all worked on them to where the level they were at least a C. So she said nobody failed. They all learned composition in my class, and I refuse to fail a student that has learned how to write the paper. So that was Betty. She was a teacher, and I remember being on the corner there. She would always say, someone would walk by, what do you think about this? She wouldn't say, I want to tell you about this war. What do you think about us going to war on Syria? What's your idea? The person would be, even if they say, I don't want to think about it, I don't care. It was like okay, that's what they're thinking, but she caused all of us to think a little more, to use your mind and to bring your part to an assignment or to an issue. And I think that is the lasting thing. Long after, we will all be forgotten in that long a time. We are going to remember Betty. She'll never leave us, but we're not going to be here forever either. But like the ripples he mentioned, she put out these ripples of people that think differently, and will never really appreciate the tremendous effect she has had. That goes into the future, and you never know. Even like the one paper that they picked up on the bus. So there's a tradition that I love. Since we each know Betty and we have a vision of Betty in our heart, when someone says her name or when we see it on the sign there, Betty comes to your mind. So I would like all of us to say, this is tradition, we all say her name together 3 times. And when you say her name all together, you are thinking about the Betty you knew. And so we will all in unison say her name, and that Betty will bring up from all of us for that brief moment. So on the count of 3, let's all say her name together. 1, 2, 3.
Betty Resnick.
Betty Resnick.
Betty Resnick.
Thank you. Oh, and as Betty always says, let the people decide.
Betty's husband, Doug, was very active in tenant work here in Chicago while he was here, and he runs would like to say a few words too.
Well, I probably have less reason or justification to speak on Betty's behalf because I didn't know her as well as most of you. But when I did interact with her, I always had a great respect for her. Her lasting legacy is, as said, is a persistent pursuit of justice. And that's something always to be admired in anyone, and she took it to the max. I believe that Betty represents the best of her generation and mine, of those who achieved a level of consciousness, of belief and understanding about the injustice in the class consciousness and political consciousness necessary to try to change it, and never gave up. Unfortunately, too many in my generation did, but it's always an ongoing struggle. So I respected her very much for that. I know when people get older, as some of you in this crowd are, you start to think about your life and maybe even a few regrets. One of my regrets is that I didn't actually get to know her better, or didn't have enough time to actually do that. But I'm very pleased to be here today, and thank you.
Jim Dale is an active teacher with the in the Chicago Public Schools, and a very active member of the Chicago Teachers Union. He has a blog called Second City Teacher, which deals with a number of peace and justice issues. He's participated in discussions with Albany Park, North Park, Mayfair, Naples for Peace and Justice.
Thank you. Yeah. So my name is Jim Vale, and I've been a teacher for almost 20 years in the public schools. And when I first started teaching in the schools, I saw that they were closing the schools. They're starting the whole privatization program under Mayor Daley. And I said, what can we do? What can we do? So that's when we formed this group CORE, and we got active. We went out there and challenged them. We went out in the streets and we said, no, there was a first fight back against that. And that was so important, that spirit. That's something we discuss with Betty and Neal all the time about the teachers and our fight back. So you see CORE today, which is the Chicago Teachers Union, fighting back against the injustices, against the mayor who's beholden to corporate interests, and not the interests of the children and the people, because there are competing interests here. So that spirit lives on. And then at the same time, we had the whole thing about the war. And as we talked about when they began the group, the whole war with Iraq, we were all fighting in the streets. So we remember we had a huge Lakeshore Drive. We took Lakeshore Drive and that big fight back in the beginning. And then people have asked continuously, as I listened to a radio program, where is the anti-war movement today? Where is it? What happened? Was it, it gave up to the Democratic Party, it stopped functioning? Where did it go? Well, I'm always happy in this insane world to keep sanity with Betty and Neal that they kept that anti-war spirit going. Every Saturday, they're out there flyering, and it just kept, it kept a light going in a very dark world today with all of these wars. It hasn't stopped under any president, and the only way is the fight back. The fight back that came from the 60s continues with these people, and the most invigorating thing is to hear the cars honking. And see people light up, especially students, young people come up and they take the flyers and say, wow, this is great. How can we keep doing this? And so I would talk to Betty a lot. We would talk about the teachers' issues, especially around Common Core. That was a big thing. And for example, today, since that's petered out, since Emmanuel and all the austerity attacks have backed off and they're on to something else, I can tell you as a fourth grade teacher on the South Side, there's a book I'm teaching called Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing. And I keep thinking back in mind as we discuss it, the kids are all into it. They love it because they all relate to it. They keep talking about their lives and this and that. And I'm thinking, my God, that's exactly what Common Core did not want. They wanted us to focus just on who, what, where, when, why this happens. Rigorous text that has no connection to the lives of who they are. And this is like we've come back, and within that they're learning. I mean, that's how they move up. So we would talk about stuff like that, and it just made me so good to come. It was almost therapeutic to be out there protesting the war, doing something about that, and then talking to Neal and Betty always talking to me as a teacher, and just that feeling of warmth, because that's what you want in the classroom, that's what you want from your family, that's what you want on the streets. And that's what we try to give them in the schools. It's a tough time now, as you know, with their fight with the city over safety conditions. I know in my school, we have problems with the cleaning. They privatized that, so we don't know who's cleaning. And the testing, we don't have the testing yet. So there's this big fight, and that whole spirit is exemplified by these two people, by Betty and Neal. And that spirit continues. And I'm so happy to see that we've got the street dedicated. It's like a small hero amongst us today. So it's live history. Dr. Martin Luther King, King Chavez, all of those people exemplify and continues that fight today. So thank you so much, and Betty, forever in our hearts. Thank you for.
Characteristic of Neal and Betty is that we question things. And I have to say to Jim that the Common Core does not enable the question why different history happens. In fact, it opposes that. It wants a narrow discussion of historical features without any context. That's one of the big problems with it, non-thinking. So to go on to our next speaker, unless you want to rebut. Our next speaker will be Mandy Ross, as part of the Ross family, who Betty and I have known for 40 years or more. We we had many a political action and discussions with her parents. Mandy's mother was particularly hoping to be here today, but could not. So Mandy, a strong advocate of justice in her own right, will be reading a statement for her mother and then speaking for herself as well. Thank you.
Hello. As Neal said, I am reading a statement from my mom, who is really upset that she couldn't be here today. I had a really long phone conversation with her that took her a long time to say over and over again how upset she was. So this statement is from her when she talks about knowing Betty and Neal for over 50 years. I'm only 45, so just keep that in mind. I'll start with her statement. I knew Betty for over 50 years. We met in Pennsylvania many years ago, and I had the good fortune to be able to continue our relationship in person here in Illinois. I still have the card she sent me when my children were born. She was a dear friend and confidant. She was devoted to her husband and extended family. As a matter of fact, she and Neal were like family to my 5 children. The grandkids have grown up just expecting to see both of them at all of our family gatherings. While we still look forward to having Neal celebrate with us, Betty's presence is sorely missed. Her laugh was infectious. Her storytelling skills were second to none. Her personality lit up rooms as well as large gatherings and demonstrations. Betty devoted her life to making the world a better place for the downtrodden. She never stopped working for peace and justice, for a world without war, and a society that benefited all, not just the elites. Betty Resnikoff left a large footprint on the path toward a better tomorrow. I loved her dearly, and she will hold a special place in my heart forever. I am sure that her legacy will live on in the lives of all her family, friends, former students, and even total strangers who may not have known her personally, but knew of her work for a better, more peaceful tomorrow. As my mom stated, Betty and Neal are kind of like family to us. When I had like friends or neighbors come to family gatherings, they'd be like, hey, who are those? I'd be like, us, my aunt and uncle. Like, it was just an easy, because they were always there. And the thing I think that I remember most about Betty that is just etched into my head is that you would be a fool to underestimate this woman, right? I mean, walker, wheelchair, whatever, fine, put the handcuffs on me. I got a right to be here. I mean, Betty was a badass. And if she loved you, she loved you. But if she had something to say to you, she was going to say it. And no one was going to convince her otherwise or make her back down, no matter what type of intimidation they tried. So I think Betty is one of my great role models in terms of being a social justice warrior and someone who just says, hey, right is right and wrong is wrong, and you are a fool to underestimate me. Thank you.
Is Timmy here? I don't see her. Okay. Scott Jabarek is a big-time activist in this area with the Albany Park Defense Network that I mentioned before, that's in defense of immigrants, in defense of tenants with the Albany Park Tenants Union, and pleasure to have you speak.
I had the pleasure of meeting Betty in 2016 as we founded the Albany Park Defense Network. As Trump took power and threatened our immigrant communities with deportation and criminalizations, organizations from across our community came together to stand in solidarity with our communities who are under attack. Betty and Neal became integral parts of this work through their work at Albany Park, North Park, Mayfair, Neighbors for Peace and Justice. I always appreciated Betty's focus, her intention, her wit, and her caring nature. Whenever we needed court support for one of our comrades, or when we began our Block by Block organizing, Betty was always one of the first to volunteer, and this was nothing new for her. Her long history of activism and engagement is an inspiration for me and many others who follow in her footsteps. I hope that she knows that her spirit lives on in us and that we will always remember her contributions. And I hope that this token of appreciation for her efforts will allow for her story to live on for generations. I know that many years from now, new generations of activists will learn about Betty and to challenge systems of oppression against working people and militarization. You know, I hope that her light continues to shine on us. And rest in power, Betty.
Somebody here from the Albany Park Defense Network who would like to speak?
Buenas tardes a todos.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Estoy muy emocionada de estar aquí en esta tarde
Audi's very excited to be here this afternoon with everyone
porque estamos conmemorando la vida y la historia de Betty,
because we're here to commemorate the life and fight of Betty.
Porque ella fue una persona muy activa y defensora de las familias migrantes.
Because she was a very active person and a fierce fighter for immigrant families.
Nosotros estamos muy agradecidos porque ella, el tiempo que nosotros la conocimos como en la comunidad de Albany Park, en la red de defensa, ella fue una persona muy activa para acompañar a nuestros compañeros en corte.
We are very thankful for the time that she spent with us in Albany Park Defense Network, because she was a very active member of our organization and somebody who would always, show up for court support and support our families.
Y yo vengo representando a esas familias como agradecimiento a Betty y su esposo. Son grandes personas con un sueño por hacer justicia en nuestras comunidades.
And I come as a representative of these families to give my deep, thanks to Betty and to Neal for their fight for justice for these families.
En esta tarde estamos elevando nuestras plegarias a Dios para que bendiga a la familia de Betty y siga bendiciendo a todas las familias, porque queremos luchar por una justicia digna a las personas, no importando el color, no importa de dónde venimos, lo que nosotros, nuestro sentir en nuestro corazón es ayudar a la gente. Por eso el día de hoy estamos conmemorando a Betty, porque ella siempre estaba ayudando a sus estudiantes, a las personas necesitadas. Ella fue una persona con un corazón muy grande.
And we ask for God's blessing on this day for our continued fight for dignity and justice for all working people and immigrants, and that God continues to bless this fight.
Muchas gracias a todos que están aquí conmemorando la memoria de Betty. Gracias al concejal Carlos Rosa por acompañar a esta familia, a la comunidad. Para nosotros es un honor trabajar siempre y luchar contra las injusticias, y por eso estamos siguiendo a los pasos de Betty. Ella fue una persona muy luchadora y por eso hoy estamos siguiendo esos pasos para seguir combatiendo las injusticias.
So she wants to thank everybody who's here today to commemorate Betty's life. Thank you to Alderman Carlos Rosa for their support, and that we continue to fight against injustice, and that's
Muchas gracias.
to everyone, and have a wonderful night.
Let me just check with Alderman Rosa. Is it okay if we continue with the program, or do you need to go? Okay, thank you. Joyce Good is a longtime activist, working hard on various issues, especially on the environmental front, such as opposing fracking, taking steps to ensure clean water, and to oppose the dangerous oil-carrying trains that come through Chicago and other areas.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Let me know if you can hear me. I don't know. I'm not very facile with this. I don't think I'm
You talk
getting anything.
very close to it, it'll work.
Yeah, but I don't want to put things close to my mouth.
Yeah, well,
This is not the time to do that. So I'm
okay,
going to
talk really loud.
I'm going to kind of project my voice, and I want to say that everything that has been said today, I've written down, I've thought about, I cried, I laughed, and when I see Betty's face, I see that round face smiling and that little guttural laugh. Everybody said it. It's not because we're repeating it, it's because this is so Betty. She was so much and so good. Now, as far as, she was way ahead of me on Empire, I'll tell you that, because when I was studying, I saw the United States of America. And I said, why didn't they just say the United States of North America? We weren't in South America or Central America. It's because, as Neal said, from the very get-go, the plan was empire. And Betty knew it, and she stood up to it. So what I'd like to say, I met Betty through Tina Hirsch. And we were all in education. There were 4 of us. And we used to go to her house, and a little different. We'd talk education, we'd order a tie, we'd laugh, we had a good time, and I call that the fun Betty. Then there was the other Betty that this lady said so very well. I call it the fierce Betty. She was immovable. Like that tree that's planted near the water, she would not be moved. And we had a demonstration where it was pro-Palestinian, pro-Israeli. It was, you mentioned it. It was at the Federal Building. About 50 people on one side, 50 people on the other side. And we all chanted, we all yelled, but nobody did anything wrong. And at the end of the demonstration, we kind of talked to our neighbors and kind of melted out. And I'm looking around, there's no Betty. So I came with them, so I kind of walked over, and there's Betty talking to Homeland Security. She's not yelling, I mean, it's a decent kind of talk, and I come over, I don't know what happened, and I look up, and I look back, Betty is being arrested. Now, I was like traumatized, because I've seen arrests before, but arrests happen when there's a cause and effect. There was no cause, there was just an effect. So he's marching, Homeland Security, marching Betty to the Federal Building. I'm walking next to them, and while we're walking, I see this microphone go like this under Betty's mouth, and she's being interviewed. So what is happening? We've got a reporter interviewing her. And we walk, she gives the interview. She is cool. She did not get upset. And we walk into the Federal Building. We were on about the 8th floor. They stuck us in there. And we know what she said to me? This I'll never forget. She said, Joyce, you know what? I told them about my medical condition, and I've got everything covered. And she smiled. So it was like incredible. Well, I was upset. She was cool. What happened afterward, I don't think, she didn't go to, that was the arrest, I think. But Betty did not stop there. And this is her lesson, her big lesson was she sued. I did not participate, and I should have. She sued for her civil liberties, and she gave us the greatest lesson there was, because if you let them take one more step, one extra step, no matter how small you think it is or absurd, they will encroach on you and you will lose. So when Betty did that, she taught me the lesson, and the ripples that we talked about. I'm part of the ripples. And I say today, to you, to Neal, to everyone here, thank you, Betty.
Dr. Howard Ehrman is a longtime advocate for public health and for a public health department in the city. He worked on this with Harold Washington administration and is continuing today. He's a founder of the People's Response Network, which has been concentrating on having the government seriously work to stop COVID-19 through testing, especially in the most vulnerable neighborhoods of Blacks and Latinx, for contact tracing, and now for vaccinations. Most recently, he's led opposition to the unsafe conditions of the Chicago public schools. Dr. Ehrman has also been active on other peace and justice activities, such as opposing the illegal and unjust U.S. government blockade of Cuba and promoting solidarity with Cuba, beginning in 1969 as one of the organizers of the first Venceremos Brigades, which was in opposition to the demands and strictures of the U.S. government. As a UIC member since 1985, Howard has worked with others to defend Betty when she was unjustly arrested there, and she spoke out, by the way, when she was arrested, that my rights are being violated, to all the people in the cafeteria, and did the same thing on the day she was arrested at the Federal Plaza. Howard also worked with Betty on setting up some anti-war panels. So,
So over 20 years ago, several of us on the campus of the University of Illinois, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this, beginning in the late 80s, 90s, it wasn't just people in communities of color, it wasn't just workers, but those powers in academia, those capitalists started going after even tenured faculty. So we began a union movement, which has been partially successful now, particularly on the east side of the campus. And one day at lunch, we get a bunch of phone calls. Betty's just gotten arrested. She was sitting there at a table right next to the cafeteria. For those of you who are familiar with the union on the, I don't think it's called a union anymore, on the east side campus, she was there on the second floor. She had a table, she was passing out leaflets, she was getting petitions signed, and they arrested her. So it took us a little while on my side of the campus, because I work in the medical school, to get over there. And by the time we get over there, we heard the story from Neal about what happened to her. She convinced the police that they were wrong, not her. And if anybody knew Betty for 5 minutes, this makes a lot of sense. Right? That's the way that Betty was. So as soon as she got done, she started calling us and saying, okay, now we've got to organize two things. We've got to organize a teach-in, a series of teach-ins at UIC, and we've got to organize students, faculty, and staff to go on the buses to the big demonstration in DC. And so we did that. And I'll just tell a little story about what happened at the first teach-in. Betty was on one side of about 8 or 9 of us, and I was on the end, and she starts off of talking, of course, that we have now entered the stage of fascism. We no longer can call this neoliberalism. That neoliberalism, particularly with the Patriot Act with 9/11, has now begun to morph into fascism, not just within the United States, but globally. All the rest of the speakers, until they got to me, said, no, that's impossible. We don't see any brown shirts. We don't see any swastikas. And then at the end, Betty and I said, if you're waiting for that, it's going to be way too late. So it's a beautiful day for Betty. And I just want to talk a bit about what you've heard from everybody else. The thing that was so incredible, and I can't separate Betty from Neal, I don't think anybody here can, but the thing that's so incredible about both of them was nobody I've known almost has been truer to their word through all these years. Nobody I've known has continued to go out to the people. That's what's been lost now the last 20, 25 years, with mainly too many of us spending too much time on social media. Nobody I knew did it for as long and as consistently and as persistently as Neal and Betty have done it. And I hope that we'll all do that. I know we're all been doing that for a while. We've got to do more of that. And the last thing I just want to say is that Betty Resnikoff, along with Neal, would be the first people at 42 West Madison who would be part of a sit-in that needs to happen yesterday. A sit-in that is going to demand that the Chicago Public Schools safely close, because that's the only thing that's safe for our children. I have 2 grandchildren right now who are PTSD. So we would, as Neal mentioned, we invite all of you to join with us. We don't have all the answers, but we're 28 organizations, including Alderman Byron Seacher Lopez, Alderwoman Jeanette Taylor, 2 unions, including Local 1600 from the Cook County faculty, and the American Federation of Government